I used to think healing was private, quiet, mine. But healing is only private when the people around you respect your boundaries. When I moved into my sister's house, I thought I was safe. Warm mornings, soft light, someone who cared. For a while, I believed that. I didn't know she wasn't just listening. She was learning me, tracking me, reading things I never said out loud. It didn't happen suddenly. It unfolded quietly, almost gently, until the morning I walked into the kitchen and saw my journal open on the counter on a page I never left exposed. The margins were marked in red. In that moment, I understood. Sometimes the person who says they love you is the one crossing a line you didn't know they'd already stepped over. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. I was sitting at the small desk in the guest room when I heard my sister come home with takeout. Her voice floated down the hallway, familiar and warm, the way it had always sounded when we were younger and everything between us still felt simple. I closed the blue notebook carefully, slid the pen inside to mark my place, and went to the kitchen. She was unpacking containers from the Thai place we both liked. When she saw me, she greeted me with a softness that reminded me of shared childhood secrets and late nights whispering under blankets. I told her my day had been better than most. I had therapy that afternoon, and for once, I felt like I was actually moving forward. The heavy fog that had been resting on my chest for months felt thinner, less permanent. She seemed genuinely pleased. She had that look of quiet pride people have when they think they are witnessing someone they love finally come back to life. In that moment, I took it as proof that she was paying attention because she cared. I had no idea she had been reading my journal for weeks. No idea that every raw sentence I wrote, convinced it was private, had already been absorbed and underlined. No idea that my pain had become material in an ongoing study I had never consented to. I would find out soon enough. The guest room had been ready when I arrived 3 weeks earlier. I remember standing in the doorway with my last box in my arms, overwhelmed by how gentle the room looked. Pale yellow walls caught the afternoon light. A neatly folded quilt rested at the foot of the bed, soft neutrals layered carefully. There were fresh white roses on the nightstand, as if someone had walked into a flower shop and deliberately chosen my favorite kind. She had helped me carry everything upstairs, teasing me about how many books I owned and half joking that I might need a separate room just for them. When we finished with the essentials, she made chamomile tea with honey and no lemon, the exact way I liked it. And we sat on the back porch watching the sun slip behind the trees. She told me the house had felt too quiet, that she had missed having me close. It sounded like truth, and I let it settle into me that way. I believed every word. My therapist had been clear. Healing required connection. Isolation, she said, didn't protect wounds, it infected them. So when my lease ended and my sister offered me a room while I figured things out, it felt almost symbolic, like some part of the universe was telling me it was safe to stop running for a while. I packed my clothes, my books, and my journal, the blue one with unlined pages where I said the things I couldn't bring myself to say out loud. Every messy, jagged thought lived there. All the pieces of myself I was just learning to face without flinching. Moving into my sister's house felt like a beginning, a softer chapter, a safe place to heal. I did not realize I was stepping into a house where someone else thought they had the right to read my mind. The first week felt like a reset. Each morning I woke to the smell of coffee already brewed, the pot waiting with my favorite mug beside it.
My sister left small notes on scraps of paper in her careful handwriting. Wishes for a good day, encouragement before therapy, an invitation for dinner at a specific time. They were small gestures, but they made me feel held in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. I started sleeping better. The nightmares did not vanish, but their edges softened. I could make it through a full night without waking up convinced something terrible was about to happen. She always showed interest in my sessions, never in a way that felt aggressive, just curious, attentive. On therapy days, she would be cooking, reading, or sorting through mail when I came home, and she would pause to ask how it had gone, whether anything important had come up. I shared enough to feel honest, but not exposed. I mentioned that we were working on patterns I had picked up in childhood, that writing between sessions helped me process, that I was learning why trust felt foreign to me, and why I constantly braced for disappointment. She listened with a seriousness that made me think she was deeply invested in my healing. She nodded at the right moments, made brief sounds of understanding, and watched me with an expression that felt like genuine care. At the time, I thought I was finally experiencing what healthy family support looked like. I kept my journal on the small wooden desk by the bedroom window. It lived there openly, the pen usually resting between pages to mark where I had stopped. I never hid it. Growing up, my sister had been the one who always knocked, the one who understood what a closed door meant. She had taught me that privacy mattered. So I left the journal in plain sight, sometimes open mid-sentence if something pulled me away. The buzz of a phone, a sudden memory, the need to breathe between heavy paragraphs. It felt safe to do that in her house. I trusted the room. I trusted her. That was my first mistake. Little cracks appeared first. One night over a simple dinner, she asked how I was feeling about the childhood material in therapy. She used that exact kind of phrasing, as if she already knew there was a specific section of work labeled that way. I paused with my fork in midair. I was certain I had never used that phrase with her. I had mentioned that therapy was helping me understand where certain fears had started, but I had never clearly named it in those terms. When I questioned how she knew, she brushed it off. She claimed I must have mentioned it before, or that it was a reasonable assumption since most therapy eventually circled back to childhood. The explanation sounded plausible enough for someone who did not want to think too hard about it. I decided I must have forgotten, that trauma really did scramble memory the way people said it did. I told myself I was overthinking because I was used to living on high alert. That is what trauma does. It trains you to doubt yourself before you doubt anyone else. So I doubted myself, but a small part of me stored that moment away. Other details began to surface in conversation that did not fit. She brought up specific memories I had written about but never spoken aloud. She asked follow-up questions that were strangely exact, as if she were tracing lines she had already seen on a page. Once, she used my therapist's full name, including the last name I was almost sure I had never shared. I remembered being careful about that, guarding the edges of my therapy space because I wanted somewhere in my life that felt untouched. When I asked how she knew, she said I had told her when I started therapy. The tone in her voice carried enough confidence to make me wonder if I really had. It was easier to accept the idea that my memory was frayed than entertain the possibility that she might be lying. So I let it go. But I sharpened my attention, quietly. At some point, suspicion started to feel less like anxiety and more like data. I decided to test what my body already suspected. I told her I had a therapy appointment on a Wednesday, when I did not. Instead, I spent those hours at the library, surrounded by strangers and the quiet weight of other people's stories. When I returned home, She behaved as if nothing unusual had happened. She greeted me and asked how the session had gone, as if it were the most natural question in the world. My stomach dropped. I invented something on the spot. I told her my therapist had talked about emotional scaffolding and building new neural pathways, a made-up phrase that sounded clinical enough to pass, but meaningless enough that I knew it had never actually come out of Dr. Lynn's mouth. 2 days later, my sister brought up the concept and conversation as if it had been on her mind. She repeated the phrase almost exactly the way I had constructed it, reflecting on how interesting the idea seemed. The cold that moved through my chest then felt like confirmation. After that, I started carrying my journal with me everywhere. I told myself it was practical because I liked writing in cafes or on the bench near the river, but I knew the deeper reason. I no longer wanted to leave a record of my inner world unattended in that house. The sunny yellow of the bedroom walls began to feel different, less like warmth and more like a soft-lit observation room. She noticed the shift. She commented on how I always took the journal with me now, asked if I was uncomfortable in the house, suggested the room might not feel right. I brushed it off. I said it was nothing, just a new habit. I said I liked keeping it close. She accepted my answer on the surface, but I could see something unsettled in her eyes that she tried to smooth away. One night, I came home after a long shift at the flower shop. We had been preparing arrangements for a big wedding, and I stayed late to finish the last centerpieces. My hands were covered in thin cuts from rose thorns, small red lines that stung when I washed them. By the time I got to the house, I was too exhausted to do anything except drop my bag by the door, kick off my shoes, and fall into bed fully clothed. My journal stayed in the bag. The next morning, it was on the kitchen counter, open. For a long moment, I stood in the doorway, unable to move. It felt like my heart was hitting my ribs in irregular bursts, as if my body could sense something my mind was still refusing to say out loud. Eventually, I forced myself to walk over. Each step felt deliberate, like I was moving toward something dangerous. The journal lay open to an entry from 3 days earlier. It was the one where I had written about my mother locking me out of the house when I was 11 because I talked back at dinner. I had written about dragging an old camping mat into the cold garage, shivering all night, the unwavering certainty that I had crossed a line that could never be repaired. I had written about the way I still slept with a light on, even as an adult, because darkness felt like punishment. There were marks in the margins, red pen, not full notes, not commentary, just underlines and stars and brackets around certain paragraphs, exactly the way people mark up pages when they are studying for a test. The house felt unnaturally quiet. I could hear the low hum of the refrigerator, the steady ticking of the clock in the hallway, the faint rush of traffic outside. Morning light came through the window over the sink, making every surface look sharper, more exposed. My sister was gone. Her mug was in the sink, rinsed but not washed, her keys missing from the hook by the door. I picked up the journal with hands that would not stop shaking and began to flip through it. Slowly, carefully, page by page. There were more red marks, not on every entry, but on enough of them to make it clear this was not a one-time intrusion. Lines about nightmares, thoughts about my ex, the one who used to check my phone and then accuse me of hiding things. Sections about my fear of being watched. Paragraphs where I tried to put the shape of my anxiety into words. All the places where I had exposed myself most deeply were marked. My private suffering annotated.
I set the journal down and gripped the edge of the counter, trying to steady my breathing. The stone felt cold under my palms, solid in a moment where everything else felt unreal. Memories rearranged themselves in my head. Every oddly specific question, every moment of eerie understanding, every time she had known details I could not remember sharing. They clicked into place like pieces of a puzzle I had been pretending not to see. She had not been guessing. She had been reading. She had been reading for a long time. When I went back to my room later, I noticed the roses by my bed. They had started to wilt days before, but I had been too tired or too numb to see it. The white petals were browning at the edges, curling inward. The stems drooped under their own weight. I gathered them carefully, avoiding the thorns, and threw them away. The sound of the petals hitting the trash bag felt oddly loud. I did not replace them. The rest of that day became a kind of quiet investigation. I replayed conversations, examined details, matched remarks she had made with things I knew existed only in those pages. Every remembered moment was another thread. Together, they formed something I could no longer excuse. She had not been understanding me. She had been confirming me. The dinners, the questions, the attentive listening, none of it had been neutral. It had all been calibrated against a version of me she had already consumed in secret. She knew what to say because she had already read the answers. For a while, I considered leaving before she came home. I imagined packing a bag, stepping out of the house, and vanishing into a life where she could never reach me again. No confrontation, no explanation, just absence. But a different need surfaced, one I did not fully recognize in myself until then. I wanted to hear her admit it. I wanted to see what she looked like when the performance broke. She came home around midday. I heard her keys in the front door, the familiar sound of her bag hitting the chair by the entryway. Her footsteps moved toward the living room. I was sitting on the couch with the journal in my lap. When she saw me, something shifted in her expression. Confusion appeared first, then recognition, then a flash of guilt that she tried to swallow. I lifted the journal slightly. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. She understood exactly what I knew. She sat down across from me, choosing the armchair instead of the couch. It created a small but deliberate distance. Her hands were folded in her lap with a careful stillness that looked rehearsed. She began to explain. She said she had been worried about me since I moved in, that I had seemed closed off and unreachable. She said that she had not known how else to help, that she felt helpless watching me struggle. She said that reading my journal had seemed like a way to understand what I was going through so she could support me better. She insisted that her intentions were good. She said that from her perspective, she was trying to be a better sister. I listened. But there was a numbness in me that her words could not touch. Her explanation did not change the core fact that she had opened something she knew was private and kept doing it, again and again, for months. When I asked how long it had been going on, she hesitated and minimized it at first. When I pressed, the true number slipped out. 2 months. 2 months. Of reading my most intimate thoughts. 2 months of silently carrying knowledge I had never meant to share. 2 months of letting me trust her while she already knew the parts of me I was still deciding if I could trust myself with. Every conversation from that period took on a new meaning. She had not been discovering me in real time.
She had been performing discovery based on a script she had already studied. In that living room, with my journal between us, I understood that she had not simply crossed a line once. She had been living on the other side of that line for weeks. I told her I needed her to leave. I needed space. I needed a house that did not contain both my body and the repeated violation of my inner life. She tried to keep explaining, circling the same points in different words, hoping one of them would land in a way that absolved her. But nothing changed the fact that she had broken something foundational. She finally agreed to stay at a friend's place for the night. She said we could talk again the next day when things had calmed down. The door closed softly behind her, but the quiet that followed did not feel peaceful. It felt emptied out. I sat there as the day turned into evening. I did not cry. I did not reach out to anyone. I held the journal and stared at the pale walls of the living room and let a hard truth settle. I had known on some level. My body had known. My unease had known. The tests I had set up were proof that something in me had already believed it. The betrayal was not only that she had read my words, it was also that I had spent weeks distrusting myself instead of trusting what those small alarms had been trying to tell me. When I sat in Dr. Lynn's office that week, I told her everything. I described the open journal, the red pen marks, the specific questions, the fake therapy appointment, the invented phrase she had repeated back to me. I described the confrontation, the half justifications, the timeline, the way the house felt different now. Dr. Lynn listened without interrupting, her expression calm but focused. When she finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she asked if I felt truly seen in that house. She clarified what she meant. Not observed, not studied, not monitored. Seen. The question landed heavily. I thought about the house, the dinners, the notes, the conversations. I thought about the months of feeling both held and watched, and how those sensations kept crossing wires until I could no longer tell them apart. I admitted that I did not feel seen. I felt like a specimen, like something under glass that someone was trying to understand from the outside.
Dr. Lynn suggested it might be time to consider a different living arrangement. Somewhere I could rest without wondering who was reading over my shoulder. A part of me resisted the idea. Leaving felt too familiar. I had spent years removing myself from situations that hurt instead of trying to hold boundaries inside them. Another part of me thought that staying might prove something, that I was not fragile, that I could handle this without uprooting my life again. When Dr. Lynn asked what I hoped staying would give me, I did not have a real answer. The space between us held that silence until it felt like its own kind of truth. My sister returned after a few days away. I heard her car in the driveway in the early evening, the same familiar engine sound that used to mean safety. She knocked softly on my bedroom door, a new habit, or perhaps a performance of respect. She asked if we could talk, her voice muted through the door. I told her to come in. She sat on the edge of the bed. I stayed by the window. She said she had spent the last few days reflecting on what she had done. She acknowledged that she had crossed a line and that reading my journal had been wrong. Then she said something that stayed with me long after the conversation ended. She said she had been trying to fix me. She did not mean it as an insult. She meant it as an explanation. In her mind, she had seen me as someone broken and had felt responsible for figuring out how to repair the damage. She had believed that having more information, more access, more data would help her do that. In that moment, everything clicked into a sharper shape. I was not a person in her eyes. I was a project, a problem to be solved, a system to be optimized. I told her there was nothing about me that required fixing. Healing, yes. Support, yes. But not in the way she had decided. I told her that what she had done was not help. It was control, disguised as care. She insisted that she loved me, that she had never meant to hurt me, that if she truly believed she was harming me, she would have stopped. She repeated those ideas over and over in different ways, as if repeating them might make them true enough to erase what had already occurred. I could not stop hearing the part where she had turned my private thoughts into a tool for her own sense of usefulness. She stayed for a while, looping through apologies and explanations, crying in a way that soaked her sleeves. She said she wanted to make it right, but kept framing that desire in terms of what she could do to restore her role, not what I might actually need. There was nothing she could say that would unread the words. There was nothing she could do that would give those pages back their original privacy. Eventually, she left my room. Nothing in the house felt neutral anymore.
I stayed. The decision surprised even me. It was not forgiveness. It was not acceptance. It was not hope. It was something colder, a kind of clarity. For once, I did not want to be the person who disappeared to protect others from the discomfort of facing what they had done. I wanted to see what my sister would do when the script changed, and I refused to play my usual part. So, I stayed, but I did not stay the same. I stopped sharing anything meaningful about therapy. When she asked how sessions had gone, I answered with bland, closed sentences that offered no detail. I felt her disappointment every time, but I did not move to soothe it. I bought a small, lockable drawer and placed my real journal inside, along with anything else I wanted to keep truly mine. I kept the key with me. I stopped leaving my laptop unattended. I began closing my bedroom door every time I left the room and locking it whenever I could. The lock was flimsy, more symbolic than protective, but symbols matter. I watched how she moved through the house now, noting the difference between how she acted and how the walls seemed to remember her. She tried to restore normalcy. She cooked elaborate meals, left longer and more detailed notes, lingered in doorways as if proximity could repair what had been broken. On the surface, the gestures looked generous. Underneath, they felt like auditions. She was performing the role of a good sister, hoping I would accept the performance as proof. The light in the house changed for me. The soft lamp glow that used to feel cozy now reminded me of an interrogation room where everything was visible except the intentions behind the questions. I stayed late at the flower shop as often as I could. The repetitive work of trimming stems and arranging blooms grounded me. My hands were constantly lined with thin cuts, but at least those marks were honest. They came from thorns I could see. One evening, I came home and found a note on the kitchen table, resting on top of a book I had left on my bedroom nightstand that morning. The note was full of concern and gentle thoughts. The book should not have been there. She had been in my room again. I did not mention it. I simply moved the book back and sat with the knowledge that even after everything, even after being confronted, she still pushed past the boundary whenever it suited her. Something inside me shifted from hurt to something unnervingly close to detachment. About a month after the confrontation, I started writing again in the house. Not in my real journal, in a different notebook. Cheap, spiral bound, the kind that did not look important. I left that notebook out. I placed it on the kitchen counter, on the coffee table, on the desk in my room. I made sure it was visible, unguarded, almost casual. And then I began to write in it as if it were real. I wrote about gratitude for her patience. I described how comforting it felt to have someone nearby who understood me. I painted a picture of myself slowly softening, slowly forgiving, slowly seeing her actions as clumsy love instead of violation. I mentioned my therapist in vague terms, suggesting that maybe I had overreacted, that perhaps I needed to work on holding less resentment. I wrote about second chances, about family, about the idea that everyone deserves an opportunity to make things right. I wrote things I knew she wanted to believe. Within a week, the notebook had shifted positions more than once. Sometimes it was angled differently. Sometimes it sat a little further from where I remembered leaving it. Pages that I knew I had left untouched were slightly bent, as if they had been turned and then returned. I did not need definitive proof. The almost was enough. Her curiosity, her compulsion, her need for access were still stronger than any lesson she claimed to have learned. I continued. I deepened the narrative. I wrote about considering a longer stay. I hinted at the idea of finding work closer to her neighborhood. I described how reassuring it felt to know I was not alone in the house. Every few days, the notebook moved again, just enough to let me know she had been there. I was no longer the one under observation. I was running the experiment now. Eventually, I wrote the final entry. I wrote that I knew she was reading the notebook, that I had known for weeks, that I had left it out on purpose to see whether she would repeat the same behavior after understanding how much it had hurt me the first time. I wrote that she told me she loved me, and that maybe she believed that. But I also wrote that love did not look like this. It did not involve studying someone's deepest pain without their consent. It did not involve turning healing into a secret assignment. It did not involve pretending to not know things you had only learned by breaking trust. I wrote that I was leaving. Not as a dramatic punishment, but as an act of self-respect. I wrote that I deserved to heal in a space where my thoughts belonged to me, that I hoped, sincerely, she would one day come to understand the difference between helping and controlling, between care and surveillance, between love and possession. I wrote that when she reached that understanding, I would not be there. I left the notebook open on the kitchen table and placed a single white rose across the page, its petals already beginning to bruise at the edges. I packed that night. I took what mattered: clothes, a few books, the photo of our grandmother, my real journal from the locked drawer. I left behind the objects that belonged more to her narrative than mine. The carefully chosen quilt, the decorative pillows, the mug with my name painted on it. I called a friend in the middle of the night and asked if I could stay for a while. She did not demand an explanation. She simply said yes. Real love sounded like that. No access required, no justification needed. Just a door opened and a couch offered. I carried boxes to the car under the dark sky and drove away as the first light began to show. In the rearview mirror, the house shrank. until a curve in the road erased it. I did not look back. My friend's couch was worn and too short, but it felt safer than any bed I had slept in for months. In the morning, she made me coffee and did not ask for details I was not ready to share. She accepted whatever pieces I could give, and when I had no words at all, she simply sat nearby and let silence exist between us. I went to therapy and told Dr. Lin I had left. There was sadness in that confession, but there was relief, too. I told her it felt like I could breathe without being watched for the first time in a long time. She asked how it felt to know that my journal was truly mine again, that no one was turning pages I had not offered. The answer lodged in my throat before I could say it. It felt like being returned to myself.
Moving in was simple. I did not own much, and that felt like freedom. I arranged my plants by the windows, stacked books on the floor, hung the photo of my grandmother on the wall. I placed my real journal on the table with a pen beside it. For a moment, instinct told me to hide it, to tuck it into a drawer or behind something. Then I remembered. I lived alone. The only eyes in that apartment were mine. So I left it there, in the open. I continued therapy. I continued writing. The difference now was that the process belonged entirely to me. I could skip sessions or pages without wondering who would be disappointed. I could say anything I needed to on paper, knowing no one would underline it in red. My sister started sending messages not long after I left. At first, they were short, focused on basic things, whether I was safe, whether I had found a place to stay. Then they grew longer. Apologies, explanations, reflections on what she claimed to have learned. She wrote that she understood why I had left. She wrote that she was sorry. She wrote that she missed me, and she asked what she could do to earn back my trust. I read the messages, but did not respond. I did not block her either. The silence between us was not punishment. It was space. Space for me to rebuild, to listen to myself, to decide what I wanted without her influence. Maybe one day I will answer. Maybe one day I will be ready to talk about what happened without feeling like I am stepping back into that house. Maybe we will try to build something smaller and more honest on the other side of this. Not now. Not while the wounds are still tender and I'm still learning how to protect them. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the fake notebook I left behind. I imagine my sister finding it on the kitchen table, the rose beginning to wilt, the ink dried on the last page. I wonder how long she stared at the words. I wonder whether she recognized herself in them. I wonder what, if anything, changed inside her. Then the wondering fades. What matters more is the quiet in my own apartment. The knowledge that when I pick up my journal at the table by the window, the only person who will ever see those pages is the one who wrote them. My thoughts are mine again. My pain is mine. My healing is mine. No one is taking notes in the margins. I started bringing home roses from the shop again. White ones, sometimes, like the ones that used to appear on my nightstand in her house, but now I bought them for myself. I arranged them in a simple glass vase by the window, a small, private luxury. I watched them open slowly, fully, unobserved by anyone but me. I watched them wilt and drop their petals. I threw them away when they were done, and bought new ones when I felt like it. No one else knew when I chose to replace them. That small privacy felt like a ceremony. The studio was smaller than my sister's house, but it felt more expansive because every corner belonged to me. The walls did not observe, They simply contained. The door had a solid lock, and I held the key. The windows looked out at the river, where water moved forward without pausing to examine its own trail. I tried to learn from that. Some mornings I woke up disoriented, expecting to see the pale yellow walls of the guest room. My hand would reach out toward the spot where the locked drawer used to sit. Then I would remember the table by the window and the journal resting openly on it. Those small moments of remembering I was safe felt like progress. Real healing is often made of moments that quiet. Months later, I ran into my sister at a grocery store. We turned into the same aisle at the same time and froze. For a few seconds, we were just two people standing among shelves of cereal and pasta. Then recognition passed between us, and reality settled over the scene. We exchanged a few simple words about how I was doing, how life had been. The conversation stayed on the surface. It never touched the wound. I told her I was okay. I did not add that I was better. That part was mine. Afterward, I wrote about it. Not as a dramatic event, but as another small marker on the map of moving on. Two people who had once known each other too intimately, passing like strangers. It was sad in its own way. It was also necessary. If you have ever felt like someone was reading you too closely, studying you instead of seeing you, gathering information instead of offering presence, I want to say this clearly. You are not imagining it. That unease in your chest is a message. That tension in your shoulders, that sense that you need to guard your inner life around certain people, that is information. You do not owe anyone unlimited access to your mind or your pain, no matter how much they claim to love you or how pure they say their intentions are. Privacy is not secrecy. Boundaries are not cruelty. You are allowed to want a door that locks from the inside. You are allowed to keep some thoughts for yourself. You are allowed to walk away from anyone who cannot love you without needing to monitor you. Healing does not need an audience. It does not need an analyst. It does not need someone standing over your shoulder, marking up your progress in red. It needs space. It needs honesty. It needs somewhere safe enough for you to say everything you need to say, knowing no one will read it unless you invite them. I am still learning all of this. I am still relearning how to trust myself, how to listen when something inside me whispers that a line has been crossed. I am still practicing the belief that my thoughts belong to me first, and that anyone I choose to share them with is receiving a gift, not a right. But I am learning it for me now, in my own space, at my own pace, with my journal open on the table by the window and no one leaning over the page. And finally, that feels like enough.